Hello, everybody. Welcome back to How Come. I'm so sorry. The audio is as bad as the state of things in the United States of America. This week, Roe v. Wade got overturned. I'm sending love to all of you who can get pregnant or are dealing with shit right now. You don't deserve this. Everybody else, I hope that we are donating to abortion funds or posting about our solidarity and letting our friends in other states know that they can come stay with us. Don't invite randos. There are orgs for that. You can donate to those too. This episode is not about reproductive rights. We are talking about early childhood sex education, and it's amazing and it's necessary right now, because if they're going to take away our rights, the least we can do is keep educating each other and the next generation so that they can have better relationships with themselves, each other. We have other episodes on Patreon that I was going to put out this week if all of my electronics had not broken. Go check them out. It's only $5. If not, go spend that money on an abortion fund. If you can do both, do both. Why not? But yeah, support each other, stay safe out there, and enjoy this episode.
How come? How come? How come I can't achieve? How come I can't achieve? I'm rolling up my sleeves. I'm rolling up my sleeves. Oh baby, I believe these guests can help, 'cause I can't do it by myself. I wanna just...
Hello, she is here. Are you ready?
I can't find my mic.
Will your Zoom sound be okay?
Maybe?
Hello.
Hi. This is Robin. I'm looking for my mic right now and I can't find it.
Hello, how's it going?
Hi, how are you?
So Mariah and I met on this panel at Oxford Femme Fest.
Yeah.
Remy, can you switch your mic to your laptop, please?
How do I do that?
The little up arrow next to the mute button.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, I'm so excited. Welcome, Mariah Cadillo.
Hello.
Let's just get everyone acquainted with you and like your line of work.
So my name is Mariah, pronouns she, ella. I am Latinx, I'm bisexual, and I'm a sex educator currently in Oakland, California. Mm-hmm. So I teach comprehensive sex education in schools to young people, primarily middle school, high school, and puberty age.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's really fun. It's a fun job, but also really important. Mm-hmm. And I also develop digital sex education curriculum alongside a nonprofit org. And then I run the Sex Ed Files, which is both a TikTok and Instagram kind of space for sex education to continue other than just in the classroom.
Totally, where it can be accessible.
Yes, exactly.
And how did you start doing that? Is this something that you grew up with comprehensive sex ed and were able to pass on? Or is it something that like you were lacking and wanted to find a hole to fill?
More so that, because I did not grow up with sex education at all. Mm-hmm. I had no information. I didn't have access to information. I actually grew up in a very religious community, and also very conservative family. So on top of that, it was really not allowed to talk about it. So that definitely has a big part to do with why I'm in this field and why I chose to work in sex education. But I love working with youth, and I always have, in the sense of community-centered education where the community is at the heart of it rather than someone coming in as the expert. So seeing the community and young people as the experts, and that's kind of the perspective I've always held.
Kind of like it taking a village.
Definitely. Yeah. Because I feel like with a lot of educational programs, they have this kind of dynamic where there's one leader or expert and you have to listen to them and they have all of the information and resources. Whereas a lot of the times, communities have that knowledge or are the experts or are doing things that are already helpful for the community itself.
Totally. I feel like even when I was talking about this episode today with some people and they were like, what do you mean childhood sex education? And I'm like, teaching sex ed to children. And I think even like saying that is very jarring because immediately people think it's like teaching kids how to have sex instead of teaching them bodily autonomy.
Yes. Yeah. There's a really big misconception that like if you talk to children about sex, they're going to want to have sex, or we only need to be teaching abstinence education. And the research shows abstinence education is not effective. And so I totally agree in that all youth deserve to have resources and be able to learn about their own bodies or how to have a better relationship with themselves and others. And access to safer sex practices, whether or not they're going to use them now or in the future, but at least they're able to get that knowledge in comprehensive sex ed. But yeah, there's a huge misconception and a lot of like anger, people thinking that like we're just going into classrooms and talking about how to masturbate or, and that's just not happening.
Like grooming and stuff. And it's like, that's not the point is to avoid that.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know who it was, but I saw some great tweet that was like this whole conversation about grooming, but then also not wanting to teach sex ed is like leaving space for people to not know about their bodies and then be more accessible to be groomed because they don't know what is the right thing or like who's allowed to touch what.
Right. Yeah. I feel like with comprehensive sex ed, I like to think of it as like a life skills class or it's really an opportunity for emotional and social development, not just like what body parts go where. And I think that's also where the confusion is that they think it's just about sex, the act itself, when it's not. There's understanding of communication, understanding of consent, or how to report sexual assault if it's happened to you.
Right.
So there's just so much more that applies to every aspect of life.
Yeah. Can we break that down too of like when we think kids should be learning certain things? Like how early would you say that this conversation should start?
From like 2 years old. I honestly think like when we are young, we are already getting familiar with our bodies. So honestly, from toddler age, these conversations can be happening in some sort of capacity. Like consent can start to happen from a very early age, bodily autonomy. As far as like sex education in schools, I kind of hold the same value that I think these topics can be discussed even in like 3rd grade. Like we could start talking about healthy friendships or communicating and identifying your boundaries, which is just like what you're comfortable with, what you want to do. Because at that age, you're already experiencing issues with friends or even like insecurity. And with the internet these days, like young children are on like TikTok and Instagram. So we might as well be talking about it.
Yeah. And I think people get really scared off when you're like as young as 2 and like talking about consent. But a really great way that I feel like I've been not teaching consent, but like allowing little children in my life consent is like through hugs. A hug is a very clear-cut thing that I know as when I was a child, if somebody said, hug your uncle, I'd be like, oh, like I don't want to do that. And it used to make me really angry when we were forced to hug them. Now I have this little friend and like his dad brought him up the other day and he was like, give Remy a hug. And I like put my arms out and he kind of shook his head and I was like, you don't want a hug? And he's like, no. I was like, oh my God, that's okay.
Honoring someone's body boundaries. It's such a simple concept, but like we make it so complicated in our world, especially with the pressures that are on people and gender like stereotypes and roles that play a big role in that too. So yeah, I there's a really great resource that implements a lot of these topics from a young age and kind of supports parents and guardians to have conversations with their children. It's called Sex Positive Families. Melissa is the person who runs it, and they have incredible resources. I'm not a parent and don't plan to be one, but if I were, I would totally use those resources. I still do in like some of the puberty education classes that I teach.
It sounds so great, but I think there is something with the name of, even like, you know how conservatives have really good branding for everything? Yes. Like everything bad sounds positive. You know, like sex positive families, that's not going to go over well with everyone.
Yeah, it's true. You're right.
So like I'm trying to think of like a different, like body autonomy, I think is one that we've been saying, or like body education. Because that was another thing that we mentioned, like when we were talking to the listeners, is like, you know, when you learn head, shoulders, knees, and toes, should you also learn chest, privates, butt as part of that? You know, like probably, you know, because I feel like you were even saying like, okay, yeah, sometimes they get taught in middle school once, and then they get the high school education once. And it's like, what do you mean once? Like we have to be having these conversations every day, because different scenarios can come up every day. And also if you make those body parts not able to be talked about, they won't be able to talk about them if they need to.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm sure you all have talked about like the way we even describe body parts and like how we give weird names.
Say, they touched my cookie. Not going to hold up in court. Also, then you have to like unlearn that and like think of what age can I actually be when I can call it the proper thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Like I used to think I wasn't mature enough to say penis.
Yeah.
Or clitoris. Like I had to like get over the hump to say vulva as well. Like that doesn't feel like a thing that people should have to work through.
Yes.
Like you're not like agree. Calling your elbow like my knee until like you're 16.
It's so true. Oh my gosh. That definitely brings up my experiences. I wasn't allowed to say butt. We had to say caboose. Like, I don't even know what that is. Is that a train? I don't know.
Yeah. If they touch the part where the coal is in. A weird metaphor. Just call it your butt or your bottom.
Yes, exactly. Gosh.
Chest is a totally gender neutral, fair thing.
It really takes away the shame from it too, when we just talk about anatomy as anatomy. I mean, and I think a lot of us have like this weird internalized shame around just like the names of body parts. Like you're so right. Like, why doesn't it always feel comfortable? And I'm sure sex ed has a big role in that, or the way we talk about bodies,
or the way that we talk about it, like with our families or whatever. Like, and kids are allowed to call it a gynae if they can't say vagina. You know, like that's fair. But they should at least have the ability to have the knowledge of what it's actually called.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. The way that parents or guardians or adults like respond to a child in that age, like has a big impact on how a person grows up, how they understand their bodies. Like I always use the example of like, say a 3-year-old is touching their genitals. Like if depending on how a parent responds to that, like it can set the tone for what someone thinks and, you know, how they go about their sexual behavior.
We had this conversation last week about a friend of mine who was assaulted as a 13-year-old by another 13-year-old. And that became a huge conversation on our Instagram, because it was like, how do you teach people enough as children to not do that to each other? And also, how do you hold people accountable if, let's say, they didn't know what they were doing was wrong? In this case, I think that the kid knew what they were doing was wrong. But, you know, like, how do you have those conversations?
I mean, it really starts with one, understanding, like, how do we respect people in those spaces where like intimacy of any kind is happening, emphasizing like talking about it before, and emphasizing being able to talk about boundaries and what feels good, what doesn't, as it relates to touch or kissing or even holding hands. So like with my work, it's more so on the prevention side of things. So to try and prevent that situation from happening in the first place, and providing that knowledge of what a healthy sex dynamic should look like, even if folks are really young. But yeah, identifying assault is a piece of that too, and really validating someone's experience if they feel uncomfortable. Like if you're questioning that, if you didn't like it, and if it didn't feel good, and if you didn't want to do that, then you can identify that situation however you want. Of course, there's like the legal definitions of assault or harassment, but ultimately validating someone's experience and providing the necessary resources so that they can further that healing or exploring their experience.
And for the perpetrator as well. Yeah. Like, we were talking about ways to hold them accountable because, I don't know, there was a kid who grabbed my crotch in kindergarten. How do you hold a 5-year-old accountable versus a 13-year-old accountable?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Every stage, like we were asking our listeners, like, how would you view accountability for like a young child? And everybody said step 1 was knowledge, teaching them, like, because you can assume maybe that they haven't had that education yet.
I mean, honestly, I think talking about what is right, what is wrong, like kind of setting the expectation that you can't do that. And if you do, there are consequences. And this is why it's not okay. I think it would kind of be a similar conversation, no matter if they're 5 or 13. I think there is, the like kind of nuance between the age thing of 13. You do have a little bit more like social emotional understanding. So,
right. A lot of people were saying that people who assault people at a young age, it's happened to them. Maybe they never learned that was the wrong thing to do. So affording them at least the education.
Yes.
And then the second step was apologizing to the person themselves. Everybody thought that would be a good thing to do. And I wish that I had that opportunity as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of people deserve that. I think about it in the same way as like how we address bullying and harassment in sex education. Because you will have students who say the wrong thing, whether intentional or not, but it's kind of the same approach where it's like coming into it, understanding that I don't know what everyone's experience is, what their knowledge is. And so that's step 1, definitely being allowing for that education to happen. And then from that point forward, it's their choices that they make with that knowledge.
Totally. And so as it stands, how are we doing with sex education in schools? Like
lacking still, I would say. I don't know the exact statistics, but I think it's only like 13 states in the US that require sex education to be medically accurate. So that's one kind of big issue.
Love to hear that.
Yeah. And all sex education programs can do better in the Department of Inclusivity, of being more trauma informed, of being more culturally responsive and relevant and accessible to all people. So because I'm in California, I'm most familiar with what the laws are regarding sex ed in California. And we have something called the California Healthy Youth Act that has a bunch of these like standards and topics in sex ed that have to be taught once in middle school and once in high school. And so all the curriculums that I've taught are built around that big standard. And it does include quite a bit of topics like anywhere from like internet safety to consent, communication, relationships, STIs, birth control, all of that, and access to these things as well. So there are a wealth of topics that I would consider very comprehensive and inclusive, but it's still, even then, it's still lacking because the people who write these curriculums are oftentimes not part of the communities that we're teaching in, or are much older and may not have that like relatability. So I think that's an issue because it needs to be accessible in that way too.
I feel like younger siblings often benefit from like a community aspect in a way that older ones don't, because like they get the trickle down of like hearing about, hopefully it's good stuff, but from their older siblings about, you know, sex or masturbation or like a knowledge of their body parts, just because it's like already being talked about with somebody who's closer to their age. Whereas you were saying if it's like that one person that holds all the knowledge, and what if you're not comfortable with that person?
Even like my younger siblings, because I'm the oldest. So I feel like that whole situation you just mentioned, I feel like I've witnessed that.
Totally. And I was like, like to my younger sister, I'm like, I wish I had a me. And she's like, well, I'm glad I had a you. And I'm like, well, I know about that.
Exactly.
Rob has this stat here that only 8 states and DC require some discussion of sexual assault as part of their sex ed education. So I'm like very happy. I mean, I'm not happy about the lack of education going on in schools, but I'm happy that you and other people are creating like online resources for people to be able to like have access to stuff if like their parents aren't talking about it or their teachers aren't talking about it. Like they should be able to get it somewhere. But the thing is with the internet is there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. And so one of the things that I really like that you do is teaching media literacy.
Yeah, that's a big part of sex education and just like being a human on the internet. We like to talk about media literacy, especially in sex education in the context of pornography, because a lot of people have access to porn, whether that is like they're intentionally looking at it or consuming it, or they are accidentally finding it. Because I work with young folks, you know, that's a big piece, is really kind of setting up the idea that it's not always realistic and it isn't the best place to learn sexual health like practices necessarily. And that's a piece of media literacy, is being able to watch a piece of media like porn and being able to decipher what's real, what's entertainment, and how might this influence my understanding of myself and other people. And how might this influence my understanding of myself and other people? Like penis size, right? Like penis size is such a huge pressure or like concern with young folks. I get so many anonymous questions about what's the average penis size? Is my penis size normal? And I think it's safe to assume that a lot of those questions stem from this societal pressure that usually comes from what they see in porn. Like they're seeing these huge penises that might be like in certain porn, you know.
Or even some of like the comedy they might consume. Cause I feel like a lot of like TV shows are always making fun of dick size or, you know, like I wasn't a big porn watcher, but when you were talking about media literacy, I was thinking about how like way back when we first started the podcast, we were talking about how people think that sex is going to be the way porn is and relationships are going to be the way that romantic comedies are. And you need media literacy for both of those to understand that that's not going to be how your relationship is. That's not how porn or sex is going to be. It's show business.
Exactly. It's entertainment. I very much like to compare like pornography to a movie because you're so right. There is that like performance. But even just breaking that down for students, like there is this sense of relief or like, oh, okay.
Totally.
Well, that makes sense then. I guess if I do decide to watch it, at least now I know it's not like fully real. Because that's
like,
your only sex ed. That's, that's confusing.
I feel like it's so tricky, or it must be so tricky navigating these topics with people, because some parents might even be like, don't bring up porn to my kid.
There is a lot of that. But luckily, with most places that provide sex education, parents always have the opportunity to look at the curriculum, to like be invited to explore it, to know exactly what their child is going to be learning. And they'll see that topics like media literacy and porn do come up. And we can't necessarily just not talk about them because they don't want their child to hear about it, because people ask anonymous questions and we answer anonymous questions.
Yeah.
There is age appropriateness, and sex educators are trained in that. So it's not like I'm going to be talking about hardcore
100%.
porn and, but parents still have that like worry. And if they do, they can opt their child out of sex ed. That is very much an option. And they do, like if they feel, like they should.
You think sex education should be optional?
I think it's tricky. Well, I wish it were more like a mandatory class rather than just like a 1 to 2 week program. Because typically if I go into a middle school or high school, I'm there for like 8 days, and that's the entire sex education program. Then I'm like, see you next year to continue this conversation. But I think making it optional gives both students and parents like the opportunity to maybe have these conversations in a place that they're most comfortable or feel safe. But I think the issue is that a lot of parents aren't having these conversations, or that like students may not feel as like safe talking to their parent or guardian about sex. And sex ed offers that kind of safe environment where we're talking about these in an enclosed like space where this is the main topic and you have like freedom to ask whatever you want. So yeah, I think it's tricky in that sense. Like I definitely, I wish that it weren't optional. And I also wish it weren't like, so taboo, I guess, because if it weren't, maybe we probably wouldn't even be asking that question. Like I'm just going back to the name. I don't think we call it sex ed in my school. I think it was like just part of health class. Oh yeah. Which I think is a helpful thing to call it too. Like it's health, it's your body. Yeah, exactly.
But you do a really cool thing where you have anonymous question boxes. How have those been helpful, and what are some of the most common questions that kids are asking you?
Yeah. So just for some background info, the anonymous question box is like, it's a tool that a lot of sex ed programs use. And it gives students the opportunity to ask as many anonymous sex ed questions as they want around the topics we're covering. So it could be anything, honestly. And every educator does it differently, but I like to bring like a colorful, decorated question box, as well as writing utensils and note cards. And I give all students note cards, whether or not they're going to ask questions. Everyone gets a note card. Everyone gets a writing utensil. And as they leave class, they can drop a question card in the question box. And then the following day, I spend about 15 minutes answering all of their questions. And they're anonymous. We have like group agreements that are set beforehand to kind of set the foundation for how we're going to use the question box. For example, one agreement is no personal questions like about me or another educator, because that's not helpful. And then
that's a rule for How Come as well.
Because I share anonymous questions, part of the thing I do on the sex ed files is share anonymous questions and answer them, so that like education can continue, and also so people like adults kind of get insight into what young people want to know, like what the reality is about the culture of young people, what's important to talk about and why we should be teaching sex ed. So with students, I always give them the opportunity to like write no on their note card if they don't want me to share it. So in the agreements, I like let people know like these might be shared either online or for educational purposes, whether that's like research or continued education. Yes. And so I always like to throw that in there just so people know I'm not just sharing their anonymous questions without permission. So that's like the background of how it works. But it is just one of their favorite parts of class. Like I've continuously gotten that feedback from students is some of them don't even care about the presentation. They could care less about a PowerPoint and a curriculum. And I get it. And they're like, can we just do anonymous questions? And I'm like, I wish I could, otherwise, or I'd get in trouble. But it's true because they get the opportunity to ask whatever they want without having to like clear their history on their computer. Like they're in a space where these conversations
or say it
are
out
meant to
loud in a
happen.
classroom where they might be judged for not knowing better. A lot of the times, if you have a question, like other people probably have that question too. It's just hard to say it. Like even that panel that you and I did, which was for college students, we opened it up to questions and nobody wanted to say anything, but a lot of them slid into my DMs after. I'm sure a lot of them did to you too, like, because, you know, you don't want to sound dumb. You want the question to come out right, you know, like, so anonymity, we use it on How Come's Instagram all the time. Like, actually, I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this because somebody wrote me a question about online harassment that I completely did not know how to answer. And I know you addressed this, but she has blocked this person, told them not to communicate with her. Now they're going on other screen names to get in touch. What can a young person do if something like that is happening?
Yeah, I feel like if someone has already done all of these like safety measures, like blocking and reporting, the next step is to evaluate your personal safety. And if this is something that you need to talk to someone else who has potentially more power to do something, like to either, you know, find this person and make sure that they don't do this again or report it elsewhere. I know like with like reporting it to the police and stuff is very tricky. But sometimes other adults can intervene and help kind of offer that safety. And even telling someone is also in a way keeping track of everything that's happened. Because unfortunately, you know, like in our legal system or even world, like without some sort of record, people unfortunately don't believe you for some reason, but you know, sometimes getting someone else like telling you or me
even
or
telling me,
is,
like it's out in my DMs now. So if anything is to happen or whatever, like there is proof, but we would want it to not get to the point that something does. So yeah, I guess telling somebody else close to you, so at least you can make sure that your personal safety and like that they can't get to you in real life.
Right. Yeah. That would be the biggest like kind of concern and why sometimes reporting it is an important thing because it sounds like they're being very persistent and dangerous and that's not okay. At the same time, each individual is like entitled to like their own safety and how they want to go about a situation or what feels most comfortable. So honestly, like, I guess just even offering that support and just being like, I hear you and I believe you. And like, if anything else happens, you can tell me, you know, that stuff is really scary and really common online.
Well, that's another thing too, but I feel like every generation online, there is some weird sex thing that you could get involved in, like Robin and a lot of people her age went on Omegle. Which is a thing that I had never even heard of. Our age, we did like chat roulette, which all of these places that you can, or that you are meant to meet strangers and that some very predatory and sexual stuff can go down on. Do you talk to them about staying away from those websites or how to use those websites or, anything like that?
Absolutely. Part of that is part of the media literacy lesson, as well as internet safety, but also acknowledging the reality of human trafficking, and talking about it, not in a way to completely scare them, but to be very realistic and provide very actionable steps to be safer. So that's a huge part of sex ed, and really important, because there are definitely steps you can take to be safe. But at the end of the day, like, it's so difficult, because like you can be as safe as you want and something can still happen. So it's like, it's honestly kind of finding who your support systems are, who you can go to if anything happens, but also being extremely aware and mindful online. For example, like if you're making a TikTok, don't make a TikTok in your neighborhood. Don't make a TikTok at school. Don't have anything in the background. Don't wear a sweatshirt that has your school name on it. Like those very little actionable steps that sometimes a middle schooler isn't really thinking about, that can sometimes save you. And then of course, we teach them about all the internet features like blocking, reporting, etc. But more so, like don't put your full name online. All of that. Don't use locations with strangers, obviously. So it's important. It's an important topic.
Don't meet up with a rando. I think Catfish and Dateline have taught us that.
Just think about Omegle. I remember my friends and I, they would be like ASL, and we would be like our exact neighborhood, like the tiny little suburb we lived in. We would be like, we're like 14 girl in this place. Like, that is so bad. They'd just be like, there was one time we opened up Omegle and the guy had whipped out like a 9-inch with like a ruler, and we were like young, and we were like, this is not where we should be. So bad.
So many unsolicited dicks.
What I was thinking of too is when I was younger, I used to go in AOL chat rooms and like have gay cyber sex with men when I was like 11. And
oh my gosh,
that was like, I think our way of trying to figure out like, what do people do? Which sex education or health class is such a safer place to figure out what people do and ask questions anonymously instead of like sitting behind a computer and like getting dick pics or whatever. But I also think in the time that I grew up in like the early aughts, in media itself, it was more common for older people to go for teenagers. Like that was like a thing in like Dazed and Confused. Like it was like a Matthew McConaughey's like character trait was that like he gets older and the girls stay the same age. And I think the conversations that we're having outside of health, where it's just like, what is a normal age of consent? And why are older people going for teens? Like, is that a normal thing to do? Is that like, because I used to think, if you hook up with like a 30-year-old when you're 15, like that's such a coup for you. And it's like, no, it's because that person is stunted and can't get people their own age. And I do see teens on TikTok saying stuff like that more. Like I saw this girl post a video about how she's like 18 and her boyfriend's 30. And the comment section was like, girl, run.
Yeah.
You know,
we talk a lot about in sex ed with these situations about the power dynamics of it all and like why it's a red flag in the first place. And understanding like just human development, the way our brains develop plays a role in that too. Like someone who is 30 is in a different place. Experience-wise, situation-wise, should be. You're right. Should be. But even just
and if they're not, that's a problem.
Exactly. And like, unfortunately, with age gaps like that, there is sometimes this like power dynamic where that person seemingly has more power, whether that's like perceived by them or their partner in that relationship, and all the potential like abuse that could happen in that, like abuse of power or manipulation and control. And so acknowledging all those little red flags, like even giving learners an opportunity to just gain that knowledge just to have, is really, really helpful, and hopefully will prevent unsafe situations like that. But still, there is still the cool element of it that we think is cool.
And I'm mature. And it's like, you can be as mature as you are, but if they are going for you, there's something wrong with them.
Yes. Yeah.
And
I really
they're probably
like that.
immature. Yeah. Like you are so mature. I'm not taking that away from you. You are. But the fact that they're saying it to you and trying to use it to get you to do sexual shit with them is fucked up.
Yeah. That's a good way to see it too, is like to put the responsibility on the older person who shouldn't be doing that. Cause that's where that lies. It's so tricky because I also think about like where we're at right now with empowerment and also like safety. One thing I witness on TikTok is young folks feeling really empowered in the way they dress or like what they post online, and like being sensual or sexual in their own way or right. And then also the like safety aspect of that and the predators that are present inevitably in the world and on TikTok. And one of the biggest like battles in the comment section is let them do what they want. Like, you guys are gross for sexualizing them. But then it's like, but there are gross people out there who want to access this because you're young, and that's a tricky thing.
I think it's always great when they have their age in their bio, like, so that at least, I mean, like, there are people who look older than they are. If you go to their page, you can go, I shouldn't be following this person if they're all thirst trap content, you know? So at least educate people on the fact that you are a minor first. I don't want to take anybody's sensuality away. I do want people to be safe. I once took a, what do you call it? It was called Prepare. And it was a safety, like 24-hour course from sexual assault, violent assault, anything like on the street or whatever. And we did combat training, but also they told us, well, don't wear anything too risque when you go out or whatever. And I remember running into my Prepare professor, my teacher, one day on the subway, and I was wearing like a short dress and high heels or whatever. And I felt so bad because I was like, oh my God, like I'm going against their teaching. But at the end of the day, if something were to happen to me, it's still not my fault. It's the fault of the person who decided that my outfit was a reason not to follow consent.
Exactly. That we live in a fucked up world.
Yeah. I mean, there will be people being like, don't put your kids in like a gymnastics costume because it's too sexy. And it's like, wait, if you think that's too sexy, like there's something wrong with you.
Exactly.
So think about that if you have ever had that feeling. So the conversations at home, would you say that you're talking to a lot of parents who are having good comprehensive talks, or parents who are trying to learn how to do that, or people who are like, I've fucked up, how do I amend that?
I think it's a mixture of parents, but I also think there aren't a lot of resources for parents to do, like for even parents to take sex education, because even me, like I did not have good sex education. And if I did not study this or go into this field, I would not know half of the stuff or have the resources to like talk to a child about this. And so parents might be in that position and not know where to go to even facilitate these conversations. So yeah, I think there's the willingness to want to learn. And then on the extreme, there's the like, I will never talk about that, or we're not allowed to talk about that. Or there are the parents who are like, I know everything sort of thing. So there is a mixture, but overall, I think there is that like desire to want to have comfortable, safe conversations with children or at home. It's just whether or not the resources are there and whether or not the topics or what they're talking about is helpful. Because it's possible they may not be.
Totally. I just think about how my grandmother and my mom would speak about sex, and my grandmother was totally like closed off because that's what she thought was good parenting, was like, you know, we don't talk about it and that's how you keep them good. Like she just thought she was doing a good job. My mom told me sex was supposed to be fun. She didn't really tell me too much about masturbating or whatever, or really orgasms. And then it wasn't until this podcast came out where she was like, I'm so sorry, you know, and had so many regrets of the conversations that we didn't have. So how can we encourage parents to like learn more and feel more comfortable approaching these topics with their kids?
It's knowing you don't have to know everything. You don't have to put on a full-on sex ed course for your children. It's all about being open and providing a safe opportunity or environment for your child to talk to you, asking questions that aren't like closing the door, like don't ask yes or no questions because that can really shut down a conversation, like offering the opportunity for someone to explain something or starting conversations with less awkwardness. Like, how are you doing? Is there anything you want to talk about? Like, how are you feeling in relationships? And also honoring when the child doesn't want to talk about it, but like continuously affirming that like, I'm here for you and I support you no matter what. You don't need to be worried about anything. Like if you need condoms, if you want to talk about birth control, like, please come to me. I won't judge you. So those reminders can be so helpful, even if no conversation about sex ever happens. It's just the knowing that, okay, I trust this adult or my parent because they don't judge me and I feel safe. And most of the time, just having that knowledge will make someone like, or will lower the risks for what someone is engaging in. Like a lot of studies show when there is that openness, like people are less likely to engage in quote unquote risky behaviors because they know they can go to someone to ask questions. They know that they are safe no matter what and not judged. So that's like, I think that's the best advice we can give parents is don't worry, you don't need to know everything. Like, I mean, even educators don't know everything. They shouldn't. There's continuous learning. Yeah,
I think it would be helpful too if parents were like, listen, your sexual health is part of your health. You know, like if there is an STI that we need to take care of, I want you to be healthy. I want to be able to be a person that you can come to. If there is an unwanted pregnancy, I want you to be able to come to me and not have to go through that alone, whatever decision you make, you know, just being like, I'm here to keep you healthy and safe.
Yes.
Like, I can teach you about orgasms too, but also that's good for your body. And I care about your body.
Exactly. I love that.
So you never got spoken to?
No. There were rare conversations where like my mom tried to talk to me about sex, but it was all in the context of like, you need to save yourself and here's a purity ring and all of that. So they weren't ever helpful conversations. So there's a lot of a shame that comes from that too, you know. Purity culture is a real cloud that kind of hovers over you for a really long time, especially when there's sexual abuse involved. Like there's a lot of confusion and feelings of like disconnection from your own body. So yeah, I really had to learn everything on my own, or even within the field. Like I've learned a lot here.
This is not a question that you have to answer, but was there anything that you went through that could have been prevented by an earlier sex ed?
100%. I feel like sex ed could have greatly impacted like my understanding of myself, my this like idea that I am not worthy of pleasure, or that I'm like disgusting, or that I'm like my body's purpose is to please others. A good place for like a trigger warning, but from a young age, sexual assault and abuse was a part of my life. And so with this like dog pile of purity culture of shame and fear tactics, that really built up this idea that my body is not mine, and like it's either going to make people uncomfortable, or it's going to make people feel good, and that's it. And so I was personally very disconnected from my body and my sexuality. And I honestly think sex education could have really supported me, or helped me at least understand like the concept of sexual assault or abuse, because in my child brain, I was like, this is just what happens. This is what people do. I had no idea what that was. I didn't even know like what my body parts were called, you know, like I had no idea. So like even just a basic sex ed where anatomical terms are introduced, or just saying like, no one should touch your body without your permission, or if it's uncomfortable, or this could potentially be uncomfortable. And if it is, that's okay. Here are some resources that could have greatly helped.
I'm really sorry that you had to go through that. I know a lot of our listeners are probably relating right now, but it's amazing what you've been able to do coming out from a place like that.
Thank you. I think that's probably why I'm very passionate about sex ed, because no matter what someone has been through, there's really that foundational like piece of empowerment of like, okay, like this is my body, and I get to learn about it in whatever way I want, and my choices are meant to be mine, and I can use this information in whatever way I want. No one's telling me what to do. So yeah, I value that 100%.
You're the person that you would have needed.
Totally.
You know, you're the person that you could have gone to, which is really nice to think about for like the next generation.
Love that.
What I was thinking too about purity culture is I didn't grow up religious, but I also kind of grew up thinking that you really should only have sex with one person, and like it should be special and whatever. And I think that might actually get in the way of a lot of sex ed conversations, especially if your parents have only had sex with each other, or if that's the thing that's presumed. Like anytime they're talking to you, like when my mom told me about blowjobs, I was like, ew, like dad, you know, like gross.
Yes.
But if it wasn't such a thing, that it wasn't like, I saved this for your dad. It's like, I've been doing this since I was 15. I've had a lot of partners. You don't even have to think about me and dad. You don't even have to think about me. But I think that's where your head immediately goes to, like when you're talking about sex with parents, it's like, ew, them.
Exactly. I think in sex ed, something that is also lacking, kind of connected to this, is there's really not an emphasis on pleasure, or like being entitled to pleasure. So even when we think about like, you're only supposed to have sex with one person, it takes out like the aspect of we all deserve pleasure. And like sometimes having sex with just one person isn't pleasurable for everyone, or like that's not
they
where
don't know
you're
what they're doing.
Exactly.
Or it's like, that's not the gender you're actually attracted to. Like, why sell yourself short?
Exactly. So I would love to see pleasure implemented in sex education a lot more, but I don't know if people are ready for that.
Yeah, no, my thing when people are talking about, oh, we have to keep children from teen pregnancy and all that stuff, I'm like, okay, then teach them to masturbate. Like that, you don't have to like detailing them how to do it, but tell them that it is an option, because I always thought the only way to sexual pleasure was through another person. And if I knew that you should be practicing at home and having sex with number one first, and you'll never get pregnant that way.
True. I would love to see like masturbation be a centered topic in sex ed, because you're so right. It's not only a safer sexual activity, but that's how people get to know their body and then be able to communicate with partners if they decide to have sex with partners.
And be able to tell them what they like and know what they like coming into it, instead of my thing I assumed was, oh, I'll have some guy and he'll teach me how to have sex. And he'll do all the stuff to me. And it's like, it's not a way to figure something out. They are also teenagers. Nobody can know your body better than you.
And getting their info from porn.
Right. And you can't get pregnant from masturbating. You can't get pregnant from a sex toy. You can't get an STD or an STI from solo play, unless you had BV and you used a toy and you used it again. You can get BV from that. And sex with a person with the same genitals, you're not going to get pregnant. How come nobody told us what a great option that was?
I get so many questions where, a lot of students are like, can I get pregnant if a guy has sex with a guy? Or, there's a lot of confusion there, but
a penis can't make a baby. A vagina can't make a baby.
Exactly.
What are the most common anonymous questions that you're getting?
Yeah, a lot of them have to do with the concept of, am I normal? Is this normal? So I get a lot of body questions, specifically about penis size or breast size or things like that. But I also get, is sex supposed to hurt? Is my first time going to be horrible? That's a really common question, because I also think that has to do with media, where there's a lot of emphasis around your first time is so scary.
Your hymen blasting open.
The cherry popping, all of that. So that's when I spend quite a bit of time kind of unpacking. And
someone told me that the hymen's not even a thing, and that's not true.
I mean, it doesn't break. It's definitely stretches. Not everyone has a hymen, but I think people have this vision that the hymen is a layer of skin that completely blocks the vagina, when it's more so
like the top of a boba thing, and then you puncture it with a straw.
Yeah, that's what people think. You're so right. But we like to explain it kind of like a donut. There's a layer of a thin skin kind of around the opening. Not everyone has a hymen. Sometimes people's hymenal tissue is thicker. Sometimes it's thinner. And it can stretch during many different activities, not just penetrative sex. So the first time you have sex, it's possible it can stretch, but it may not. And if it does stretch, it's possible, it could be uncomfortable. But it's, you're not popping a fruit.
Right. Yeah. We had, I think it was our first season. This girl was telling us about her sexual debut of P&V. And she was like, I had masturbated so much with toys that it was it was the best time ever. And nobody needs to have a painful, I think a lot of us thought that was the expectation. And it's no, you can very much not have that happen at all.
Right. A lot of people attach whether or not the hymen is still unstretched to virginity and the concept of virginity, which is also just garbage.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of layers to why we think these things, or like we get to those conclusions.
And those are also wrapped, like the whole concept of virginity is wrapped up in like a morality thing. And like, let's just take that away. Like your sex life has nothing to do with your morals unless you are doing something legit immoral, like being a pedophile or a rapist.
Yes, exactly.
Sometimes it can feel really hopeless. Like, oh, I wish that I had had that information. I wish that I had been better equipped. But, you know, we're talking about childhood education. Like education never stops. You can come to these realizations at 25, at 30. It is really just because you didn't have it then doesn't mean you shouldn't have access to it now, or that you shouldn't seek out that information or that healing. Whenever we're talking about like purity culture specifically, I think of that scene in Jane the Virgin where her grandmother made her crumple up that flower. And I know a lot of people, even who haven't gone through that, they feel like your former way that you've been crumpled is going to be an indication of how you move through life forever. And it's not.
That crumpled up flower analogy in my Bible class. Like they legit used that. I think a lot of Bible classes used to do that. And I was 11. I was 11 being told every time you have sex, a petal's going to fall off and you're going to be
horrible
freaking weed at the end of it. Like what?
No. Every time you have sex, it's going to charge you up for the rest of the day if it's good sex.
Yeah. And you'll learn something.
And you'll bloom.
Exactly.
And maybe even make little thorns to point the people that you don't want near you.
Yeah, absolutely. We can totally change this analogy to be so much better.
But I think that's a huge part. And I don't know where, like who benefits from people feeling that way about themselves, except for abusers. Because once somebody feels like they are a lost cause and to be discarded, they're going to act like that way, and they're going to let things happen to them more. And nobody's a lost cause. Any
time where someone's like autonomy has been violated, there's definitely that response of like, okay, well, I'm just going to do this more or whatever. Fuck it. This is just going to continuously happen. Or someone is completely closed off, or someone, like experiences vaginismus or, or is more hypersexual. There's so many like connections to these things that can happen. And there also isn't a lot of like education on that either. And I wish there were.
Yeah, no, just to bring it back to the episode I was talking about where my friend was assaulted by another kid, like, I wonder if that child feels like she is, she's an adult now, but I wonder if she was feeling that she was too far gone and couldn't recover from it. And like, just not talking about stuff creates an unsafe environment for everybody.
I totally agree with that.
We talked about the most common questions, and most of them are like, am I normal? Are any of them like sex drive related? Like, am I too horny? Am I not horny enough?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of people are like, what happens if I masturbate too much? I get a lot of questions from high schoolers who are like, I think I'm addicted to sex. And it's just like, oh, bless your heart. You're probably not. It's probably totally normal. And I mean, you're okay. And also
this is what sex addiction actually looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Like you are 14. Don't worry. There are definitely those questions or even questions about sexuality of like, I'm not really feeling these feelings. Am I asexual? Or just like plain old puberty and development. Like, am I supposed to be feeling like I want sex at this age? Maybe not. But also validating that hormones are raging when you are going through puberty, even in high school. So what you're experiencing it's totally normal. And here are some resources or tools that you can implement if you care, if you want to. You don't have to.
Puberty is such a mind fuck because I feel like at all stages of life, you're like, am I behind? But when you're going through puberty, you're like, I can actively see that person has boobs and is tall and I'm not yet.
Yeah.
Like, am I behind? And it's like, with anything, you're gonna go at your own pace.
Yep. Yeah. Puberty is rough. It is so rough.
So rough.
Like when I first started developing boobs, like my mom took me to the doctor because we didn't know what was going on. Like that's how little information I had about body stuff. Yeah. Like when you start to get the breast tissue is super, super hard, kind of like a marble, the nubs, like
mosquito bites.
She took me to the doctor and was like, we don't know what's happening. And the doctor was just like, you're going through puberty. Like, so from the get-go, I was like, something's always wrong with me.
That's wild. Yeah, because if you're not talking about it, people think it's gross. Like, periods used to be so gross, and now I'm so desensitized. Like, I'm like, yeah, it's a thing that happens. It's fine.
Yeah.
But yes, these things, we all go through them. If you don't go through puberty, then talk to your doctor. But most likely you will. And it's going to be weird and it's going to be fun, but it's normal.
Yes, exactly.
Cool. Do you have any advice for people? Because, a lot of people come to this podcast to learn how to have their first orgasm. I'm sure you get a lot of anonymous questions about orgasms. What is the advice that you would give to somebody who hasn't had one yet and wants to?
Yeah, great question. I do get this question a lot. Also in like my DMs or on TikTok, a lot of people worry that wherever they are, whatever age, like that something's wrong with them. So starting with like validating that there's no wrong time to experience something for the first time. There's a process that's different for every single person. Being patient with yourself is incredibly important. Try to remove the expectation that this needs to happen no matter what. Try and remove the expectation of orgasm during sex, because sometimes that can put a lot of pressure on people and they won't experience orgasm during sex. Really emphasizing the need for solo play and getting to know your body, and maybe starting there. Using different tools like your hands, a shower head, a pillow, or toys, and either connecting with experts or on social media, because there are so many tools that people can use to even just know which way to touch themselves, or what toys to get, what toys are affordable. All of that can be, it is very accessible because it's on the internet. But ultimately it's having that patience with yourself and
have patience.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with finding a job. You know, everyone's so nervous about finding a job. And when I was little, if you had asked me what I wanted to be, podcaster didn't exist, So too didn't exist a clitoral suction toy. So try all the things that are available and then maybe wait for the thing that's going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Also acknowledging, it is frustrating. It can be so frustrating, but that doesn't mean something is wrong with you. And also evaluating what you've been doing, what type of sex you've been having, maybe if it's with a partner, what is working, what isn't working, and being really, really honest with yourself and a partner. I know that can feel really difficult because in a world where a lot of people fake orgasms, don't do that. Honesty is it's relieving, it's liberating, because that's where you get in touch with what you need, what you want, and whether or not the person you're having sex with or the toy you're using is working, because it might not be, and it might not be the thing for you, and that's okay.
And it's okay. Do you have any advice for how parents should approach the conversation if like a little child is like, I'm coming, in so many words, or they notice that they're jacking off everywhere, and they're young? How do you approach that conversation? What do you say to that child, depending on the age?
I think that would be a really good time to explain like anatomy, like this is your penis, this is your vulva, and like this can feel really good. You may have already figured that out. And when it does, sometimes this happens, like really going through the reality of what our bodies physiologically can do, acknowledging
sometimes there's a fun feeling that occurs.
Yes, acknowledging that pleasure, like this feels good and it's supposed to, and it's okay if it does. But you should do this in private, but don't do this in, in public, or don't make someone touch you or see this if they don't want to. Really emphasizing that public and private concept, because when people are really young, that may not be something they're thinking about, emphasizing the consent of it all. And emphasizing that, like, if you need anything, if you have questions, let me know. If something is becoming like unusual, or, the child is doing something that is starting to make people feel uncomfortable, then maybe it's a good time to like consult with a professional, like maybe a counselor, or get more insight on like what that might be. Is it they're emulating what's in the media or what they're seeing online? But ultimately, like, don't punish someone, because that can leave a really long-lasting negative impact. But rather just
no, that's bad. It's not bad. It's normal. It happens. Just maybe don't show other people.
Yeah. And
we can have another conversation about this another time.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, kids, they don't even know stuff is sexual until you kind of tell him. I was a camp counselor for 7-year-old girls who, if I was sitting like this, or like with my legs apart, they would sit on one leg and like straddle a knee, and one of them would start going back and forth, and I'd go, totally, you can't do that. Yeah. And I felt so bad being like, I get it, but like you can't, and especially not to another person. Or like when I was a camp counselor with 3-year-olds and would change them into their bathing suits, they had to show me their dicks. Yep. It was, you gotta see this. Yeah. And I was like, in fact, I do not. It's wonderful. It's yours, but it's not for anybody to touch, or that's your thing. Exactly. And I do think that those conversations for people working at camps or in schools are easier if the parents have had that first. Oh yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And I love that. Like I get it, but let's not do that here. Totally get it. Oh my God. My friend's little sister used to slide down like on the awning poles in the city. She would just slide down and we go, Cece, don't do that. And she goes, but it feels good. And we go, I know. Yeah. Oh my gosh. But you're so right. They're not thinking about sexual things. It's not the same. It's just like natural that it feels good. Yeah, it's supposed to. But that doesn't mean they're like fantasizing about sex all of a sudden. No, I think we've had such a great conversation, and I'm so happy that you could give us your time and all your expertise. And I feel very lucky for the kids of today that they have you. Oh, thank you. This has been so wonderful. I'm so glad. Can you tell us where everybody can find you and all of your resources online? Absolutely. On Instagram and TikTok at Sex Ed Files. And that's it right now. I don't have any like websites or anything like that. Maybe someday. Easy. I have to ask you this question, which we have to ask everybody after a sexual experience. And this has been a sex educational experience. So Mariah Cadillo, Did you finish?
Yes, I did.
Amazing. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And we'll see you guys next time on How Come. Goodbye.
Bye.
It's not you, it's me. I try so hard to finish honestly. They say you'll know when you go all the way from A right down to O. Oh no, I think that I've still got a ways to go. Oh, I'm sick of this and I have got to know. How come? How come? How come I can't achieve? How come I can't achieve? I'm rolling up my sleeves. I'm rolling up my sleeves. Oh baby, I believe these guests can help. 'Cause I can't do it by myself. I wanna just